But when you come to asking the question, why poor, you get a different slant altogether. And I think that everybody in this church today is a wealthy person. Most of us have got cars, most of us are able to travel around, we've got our own home, nobody here is suffering from malnutrition or anything like that. And you compare that to the Indian scene or the Philippine scene, and we're doing very, very well indeed. And there's a danger of us becoming arrogant and assuming a lot about the poor. We think of the poor that we know. Are they lazy? Have they been given golden opportunities that have flown away? Have they wasted money on addictions? Have they wasted money on gambling? Do they fail to think in terms of long-term consequences? Or are they a dependent mentality? Some years ago, I was asked by an aid organisation to travel to the Philippines to do a review of their work. And I was talking to a college, and the college was saying, we need this, and what we'll do, we'll go to the Western world and ask them to support us. Now I asked the question, why go to the Western world? Why don't you go to your own people and ask? Why don't you go to your own middle class in the Philippines and ask? And in that organisation, and in so many organisations, there develops a dependent mentality, which we will survive because everybody will give us handouts. That happens with the poor sometimes as well. But while we can play the blame game, when you see children playing in filthy, contaminated puddles, when you see children suffering from war, when you see children suffering from bad decisions by parents, and when you see children suffering in abusive and alcoholic homes, the kids can't be blamed for that. And you can't play the blame game as far as it is concerned. And as Christians, instead of taking a superior attitude to those who have not, we should see it not as an opportunity of arrogance, but as an opportunity of action. Now, I realise that I'm sounding a little bit socialistic. Right? And there's a little bit of in me, if you scratch deep enough, you'll find that my low-class background in Middle Park and all that type of thing comes through. But when you read Luke's Gospel, through political spectrum, you do get the idea that Luke was a bit of a socialist. And we ask ourselves the question, is God interested in the poor? Now, I'll say he definitely is. I've got a lot of Republican friends in the United States, and they're very concerned about the abortion question. And the reason why the Republican Christians supported Donald Trump so strongly, not because of his social emphasis, but because he didn't believe in abortion. And I'm pretty conservative when it comes to the question of abortion as well. But when you go search through the Bible, you're struggling to find a reference to abortion. When you go through the same Bible, you will find hundreds of references to looking after the poor. And the little idiom that the Bible uses for the poor are the widows and the orphans. And you'll find stacks of references to it. For example, there's a famous statement by Micah where he says, God requires of us justice and kindness. In Psalms and in Proverbs, we read that a righteous and wise man cares about justice for the poor. And parts of the Bible say that he who is kind lends to the poor. And we'll look again at this great parable of Jesus when he said, he who has done this to the least of my brethren has done it as unto me. And we'll look at the vision statement of Jesus in Luke 4, where he says, I have come for the sake of the poor. When we look at the Sermon on the Mount, which becomes the Sermon on the Mount plain in Luke's Gospel, we discover that Jesus is saying, blessed are those who are poor. So, the guy in this parable, he gets kicked downstairs to hell. He has not obeyed the Torah. And Jesus is saying, just because you are wealthy doesn't mean to say that you are good. Now listen, he didn't kick the guy when he walked past him. He didn't abuse him. He didn't blame him. He didn't lecture him. What did he do? He just ignored him. And we're reminded by James when he says, our faith is dead unless it spells itself out in practicalities. Now, what question should we ask as religious people? As you've gathered, I've spent a lot of time in the last 30 years visiting the United States, taking groups over there on study tours. And I noticed a big change. When you visit evangelical churches, I'm convinced evangelical, let me say that. When you visit evangelical churches, you have the idea that they are only interested in the souls of the person. So they go to Mexico, they go to the Philippines and places like that, and they wouldn't worry about the poverty, they would be worried about leading them to Jesus, which is a valid concern. But in the last 15 years, I noticed a change, that evangelicals started to take an interest in the welfare of people. And mission trips, poverty repeals and things like that, trying to make a difference to the countries that they were ministering in. And when you visit a lot of these churches, as I've said to you before, you see a large warehouse in a lot of the churches in Los Angeles from the West Coast, large warehouses just full of food to give to the poor. And they have an organised feeding program in order to keep people alive. But it's not just feeding the poor. It's not just giving them food. I think religious people, Christian people, should be thinking beyond that. In the Philippines, I visited a little church there and asked to preach. I don't know if you were with me, Marge, the chickens running between your legs when you're preaching and all that type of thing. It's quite an experience. But this Christian group was right beside a lake. And they were telling me that they used to make a living out of fishing. And I looked at the drying racks. They catch these little fish and dry them on racks and then sell them. And there are hardly any fish there. And I asked the question, why has the fish died? What's wrong? Why is that source of income declining? And they said, because factories have been built around the lake and they're pouring pollutant waste into the water and our source of income is dry. And when you look at that, it's not just a matter of feeding the poor, but there are political and commercial interested parts as well. And if Christians take an interest in that, once we do that, we start treading on the political grass. And all types of things become political as far as Christians are concerned. You know, women's rights and things like that. We're hearing a lot about global warming and the disappearing of some islands in the Pacific. Gambling is an issue, which is a political issue. And it interests me that the pokies are more inclined to be built in areas where they are disadvantaged. In the northern suburbs, in your area, Ian, in Dandenong and so on, because they know that the poor will become hooked on that. And people like Tim Costello, to me, are heroes because they are working hard to try and get a Royal Commission to investigate that. Suddenly, poverty becomes a political issue. I used to get upset about alcohol advertising, and I still get upset about it. And that is a political issue. Marge and I were up in Darwin once. Early in the morning, we got up and walked along the beach, and there were Aboriginal people, absolutely blotted. And somebody was selling them their alcohol. Someone was advertising it. And when you think of that, if we were going to take action, it would become a political issue. So, as Christians, we shouldn't be frightened of treading on the political grass. I realise that people say keep out of politics and all that type of thing, but there are times we are bound to be involved. Last week I was saying that the parable of the week before, the parable on risk taking is got an accountability factor in it. And this one has as well. There's one guy ends up in hell, and the poor man ends up in heaven. Now, I'm not a hellfire and brimstone guy. As a matter of fact, if you press me on my theology of hell, I think it would be being locked in a little room with a bed and toilet and shower, and you get looked after. But there's one television set, you switch it on, and all you can see is NRL rugby. You can't see AFL football, but it's got another channel. And you switch to the other channel, and there's a clip from 30 years ago of Bill Lawry playing ball after ball after ball. That's what hell would be like. But here, let's leave out the theology of hell and the details of hell, and let's see that this parable is saying we are accountable. And with the way we treat the poor is under God's scrutiny. Now, I'm saying this to us as individuals, and I'm saying to us as a church as well. It should be on our agenda. And think of it as doing it under Christ. Think of this text from Matthew 25. They will answer, Lord, when was it we saw you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you? I will answer you, truly I say to you, you did not do it to me. Just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you do not do it to me. And you will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. What the Bible is saying is our attitude to the poor impacts our relationship with Christ. And if we are Christ-like people, we will have this concern. Well, what about this quote from James? What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith and you do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to you, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what good is that? And then he goes on to say, faith without action is dead.